liberals of Reddit who were conservative before, or conservatives who were liberal before, what made you change your state of mind?
My moment of never trusting politicians again, and when I realized I cannot be a Republican. The Iraq invasion. The Bush administration straight up lied and used Colin Powell as a patsy in his dishonest speech presentation to the UN. For those who aren't old enough, after 9/11 you couldn't pass more than 5 cars without seeing an American flag. We rallied as a country. It created such a tremendous feeling of patriotism. I was in the military at the time and it was amazing the level of thank you for your service words from strangers. The Bush admin took our collective goodwill and patriotism as a country and leveraged it for business and personal reasons to attack Iraq, and men and women died as a result of the lies. To me, it is unforgivable. I will never trust my government again when it comes to war. Never. Not sure if this counts, but my views went from liberal to leftist. I bought into the US Democratic views about how identity politics, first black president, more women in polls, was ultimately we should strive for the most of it. It was true, but then I asked myself, what's the point of have a different type of leader if nothing changes? That's not progress, that's fraud. I believe in kindness and compassion and helping those in need. I would give more in taxes if someone on the other side of the country whom I will never meet can get the help and care they need to get back on their feet. My real epiphany was during the New York primary of 2016, where Hillary Clinton was giving a speech to Verizon executives and Bernie Sanders was downstairs with the workers protesting for better treatment. That's when I knew I had to be more politically educated. Well, growing up I saw a lot of anger in my life. My parents got divorced when I was in the 8th grade, and that's when I got big into politics. This was in 2016. Growing up around hate anger, I became an hateful, angry person. My child instincts drew me towards politics of my nature, so it was conservatism. I am now a liberal. I would blindly support Trump and Cruz and Ben Carson and all of them. It got bad in 2017-18 that I started watching people like Crowder with Crowder. I was in the debate team and knew enough of how to argue a point but know so much to defend it. So I go quoting Crowder and Ben Shapiro and going around saying homophobic and transphobic shit, right? 1350 shit like that. I'd wear a MAGA hat to school and follow Fox News. Skip past all the mock in those years, the bad years. 2019 was my turn around. I'd been in therapy and my therapist wanted me to work on my internalized anger, and to forgive my mother for everything she had done. It took a lot of effort, but eventually I made it through my struggle and forgave her. We still struggle, but I love my mom and we still talk. One of my best friends also around the time came out as trans. This left me at a crossroad: stay in my hateful negative ways, or learn and progress and better myself. I chose to better myself, and now am still working on it, improving and learning. I could take the easy route and stick to tradition, but American tradition doesn't support a lot of oppressed groups, and am glad I'm aware of the hurt in oppressed communities. I support the LGBTQ+ community, all minority communities, that disabled community and many more. Doctor, I stopped being a conservative because I was tired of being a hateful and angry person and chose love and self-betterment and the betterment of those around me and in my communities. I simply became more educated on the issues I thought I knew. I was all for the death penalty until I learned how it's used to secure guilty pleas for people unable to afford a decent lawyer and is used disproportionately against minorities. I was all for the idea of trickle-down economics until I realized all that trickles down is piss. I was all in favor of a strong military until I learned, spent 23 years in uniform, that the massive budget mostly goes to defense contractors and little to actual troop welfare and benefits. The list goes on. Also, I've always been an atheist and never thought politics should be a place to debate social issues. But I began to see how conservatives use their positions to push their morally superior beliefs, which inevitably excluded non-white Christian types. As I matured, I realized I have a natural disdain for hypocrisy, so if there's one side of the aisle that's awash in hypocrisy, we'll just look to the right. I used to be on the Jesus juice from birth to my late 20s. I love people regardless of their sexuality, faith, or background, but I still held some pretty short-sighted beliefs. The more I got to know different kinds of people and their unique experiences, the more I realize how worthy every person is of love, respect, happiness, and freedom. Then the bottom fell out of my life. The remaining members of my family died. Everything I ever wanted out of life was taken from me. I was diagnosed with not one, not two, but 3 debilitating diseases, and as I prayed and begged God for wisdom, peace, strength, and faith, I was met with cold, dead silence. I was screaming into a void for 5 years, so I gave it up. I realized that no one was coming to save me and I was on my own. Bad shit happens to good people all the time and you have to make the best you can with what is. But the idea that it was my responsibility to stand for and protect people who needed it was still there. So that's where I'm at. I grew up and realized my parents were racist and don't understand how government actually works. They hate each other and have been divorced for 35 years but have the same political views. From what I know, my mother hasn't filed her taxes at all for 20 years. She doesn't make much but screams about her freedoms while being on welfare and using Medicare, and screams about how taxation is theft, but also to both stimulus checks and years ago stole the college fund her father set up for me. She's also anti-vax, so is my father. My father didn't steal from me, but he's the same way, using social services and screaming that taxation is theft. Also anti-vax morons. I don't speak to them anymore. It's been 20 years. Also, they were physically and mentally abusive. The best thing I ever did was shut those 2 morons out of my life. My sister is a right-wing nut too, and she just lost her house, my childhood home, to the bank and is on unemployment. Another right-wing socialist. I was conservative, then I was liberal, then I went to work in the government. Now I don't think I am either. It is ironic. It is broadly accepted to criticize the government. Most of the things people complain about aren't really true though, or they aren't actually important. For example, when media outlets report on what senators say, it is often taken wildly out of context and spun one way or another. Senators can be corrupt, but they aren't that stupid. And no, the government does not have much control over the economy at all. There is a couple things they can do, but really almost all of it is actually in the hands of private businesses, corporations, and consumers. And many parts of the government, its programs and strategies are actually really well planned out. Not all of them, of course, but the failures get highlighted while the successes are unsung. Politicians and their parties take advantage of their supports too, in ways that is hard to imagine. But it is well known that by taking a certain topic and making it political, even if it was not political before, you can change how people think about it. It is like brainwashing, but you don't need lasers, or chemicals, or radio waves to do it. All you have to do is frame a question differently, and somewhere between 30% to 50% of people can be convinced to change their reasoning. It's scary. I have had many conversations with people that ended with them emphatically insisting on my original point, my own stance. But I didn't really convince them of anything. I didn't have to. I just reframed the question until they said what I said, and they may not even realize it. I think this is part of how we end up with incredibly partisan zealots. A lot of important people are actually like me though, not strongly conservative or liberal. They are pragmatists instead. They may have opinions, but will quickly set them aside if they have a reason to. They do what they need to, in order to stay in power. Ideological purity is just something meant to keep voters in line. I should stop before I write a book. Doctor, I became neither after I worked in the government. I started my political career far to the left, the just fix things phase, then swung to the medium right in college after learning more about fiscal policy, taxes, and business finance, economics, the how it's supposed to work phase. Now I'm leaning back towards the center, left because the theories don't work. The fact that salaries have remained stagnant for decades while every facet of our lives, physical or digital, are monetized and normal life milestones are being priced out of reach of nearly every American is proof positive that the government and our form of free market capitalism is corrupt and doesn't work, let alone the comparison of our wages or healthcare to that of Congress, C-suite execs or retired generals sitting on defense contract boards. Now we have these massive funds buying up single-family rentals and houses at 50% or more than their fair market value only to be rented out to what should be new families getting their first home. That's not a problem you can poo-poo away, just ask Japan how their shrinking population is faring. So in summary, despite some flip-flopping, my current take is somewhere in the center to left until this oligarchical problem is resolved, and it does need to be resolved, or we'll be looking at a fucking revolution or dissolution of the country. I wouldn't fight for this country right now either, and I imagine a lot of guys would agree, which also makes this a matter of national defense. I took a summer class for high school students with a college professor. I grew up incredibly religious and was at religious university for the course. The professor told me that she is an advocate for marriage equality. If someone isn't married to their partner, that partner likely isn't their next of kin. So the shitty parents that kicked out their gay child now have the power of attorney if said child ends up on their deathbed. I was already starting to walk away from conservative ideals, but this talk is what made me start sprinting, so to speak. If I had missed something so obvious in making humane political choices, what else was I missing? Was I dishonoring my faith by supporting politicians who make life harder for historically oppressed communities? I've become a much more open-minded person since then, and I'm very thankful for my professors for broadening my horizons. Raised a Rush Limbaugh conservative, spent my teen years as a little ball of anger, read Ayn Rand in high school, got an econ degree and a very libertarian school, spent a few years with a smug the free market will fix everything if we just burn the system to the ground and let it regrow unhampered look on my face, and then I went to a grad program where I had to interact with people who weren't smug libertarians. Doctor, getting out into the world forced me to test my assumptions, and getting to know real people replaced my caricatures with empathy. The idea that the whole country can be run by only two different sets of ideas is ridiculous. Why even have red or blue? Why not a whole rainbow of different ideals? Why do we have to separate ourselves into oppositions? Fuck bipartisanship. Edit. I didn't think this many people thought this too. I hope all politics disperses from being factions. Don't be afraid to change what's broken, just be. See, it's been like this for decades. I'm liberal-ish. I believe in a free market, no gun laws, 100% equal rights and aggressive anti-racism/homophobia/oppression measures. I used to be a hardcore Trumper, back at the very beginning, and conservative. I even watched Pajero and Ben Shapiro. I spouted awful things about people I didn't know and didn't understand because the news in my social circles told me to. I believed that the NRA was supporting our rights. I believed in the government and the power of the vote. All that changed when I saw a poster with a Lincoln quote on it. It read, "I do not like that man. I must get to know him better." I remember reading that and thinking that makes a lot of sense, I'm gonna go do that, so I did. I read books, talked to people, and really got to know who it was I was told all my life to dislike or fear. And it turns out that was all a load of BS. The more I read and understood, the more I began to see what the world was really like. It was this pivotal moment that completely flipped my outlook on the world, and on politics. I realized how important change and equality was, and I saw why so many of us feared it. I began to see that it wasn't up to me what other people do with their lives, and it wasn't up to others what I do with mine. After some long introspection, I even realized that I was myself what I had once feared, and I came out. That whole conservative thing was gone after that, to be sure. Grew up a very conservative Christian, still a Christian, but now more closely follow the Bible, which makes me lean left. What made me change my mind is traveling and realizing the American Christian church is nothing more than a loudspeaker for the Republican Party. Everyone's main goal in life should be to love and support everyone around them. Turn off Fox News, bury your nose in the New Testament, and love everyone in your life. I grew up in deep red South with conservative Christian parents. My entire worldview was warped by that. Then at 15 they let me use the internet unhindered, and every fucking thing I said got me completely obliterated, like consistently. I got a WoW sub and kicked from my first guild for being a bigoted dickbag since I called gays AIDS-spawning monkeys, and my second guild for saying my parents checked the basketball courts near our house before we moved in to make sure there weren't any black kids. Was the entire internet filled with liberal hippie idiots? My 16-18-year-old self thought. Then I fell for furry girls, ran into some furry porn and was like, oh shit, this cat chick is hot. Made an account, and again, people weren't too appreciative of my ass backwards ways. I got banned and shit on constantly. That's when I realized maybe everyone around me personally was the problem, especially as gay stuff became more normalized and religion became less important. The final clincher was my first Twitter account. I joined the conservative group, and the absolutely insane theories and stuff they were coming up with seemed way stupid compared to the stuff the furry artists I followed were saying. So I swapped to the other side and really studied it. Liberal policies just made sense. I have a friend over in Norway and another in Finland, and socialism isn't scary. If anything, I found myself envious of their positions on stuff like healthcare and minimum wage. This is also around the time I became agnostic. If everything else I learned as a kid was bullshit bigot speech, who's this God thing I have never felt in my entire life that a large chunk of the world doesn't believe in, and science has basically moved long past. At this point something just snapped. Why do I hate trans people? Why do I think people with pronouns in their profiles are idiots? Why do I think gay marriage shouldn't happen? Why was I ever okay with racism? None of this affects me in any way at all. I shouldn't care. And I really should be supportive of it because it doesn't affect anyone in any bad way. If someone wants to be a girl, I needed a reset though, so I just deleted everything online, deleted my entire history, and remade myself as a brand new person essentially. I joined liberal groups and forced myself to understand their positions, and over time I agreed almost 100% with everything. The only thing I'm still on the fence on is trans guys playing female sports. That one still seems a little far-fetched based on our tech right now. Other than that, I'm on the Bernie train. Dr. Blame furry porn and getting wrecked online. I voted conservative for about 20 years as I tended to believe they had a more cautious approach to national economic management in Australia at the time. I also felt they might have traditionally held some social policies more in keeping with some of my own views. As an observant Christian, unlike many other people of faith, abortion and marriage equality were not my main concerns. It was more a general sense that the Conservative Australian Party were less aggressively secular. I've since changed my view as I've become more focused on moral issues. I think that many of the conservative parties in the places I've lived, Australia, UK, USA, have totally abandoned their moral obligations to people who deserve the most support of the state, among other issues. I find the thoroughgoing individualism, as appears in libertarianism, to be completely at odds with my Christian view that embraces community, selflessness, shared outcomes, loving our neighbors, and even our enemies, rejection of pridefulness, obligation towards stewardship of the natural environment, and advocacy for any person who is less fortunate. These are fundamental commands of Christ, and I struggle to see how I can vote for a party that embraces prideful nationalist populist positions, and a self-serving survival of the fittest mentality toward my fellow citizens. Additionally, the issue of abortion, for me, cannot be viewed in isolation apart from poverty. A woman at or below the poverty line is more than 5 times more likely to request an abortion, along with the reality that a woman experiencing an unwanted pregnancy faces far too little support from the state to fairly consider carrying the child to birth. For these reasons, I feel I need to support a party that aggressively addresses systemic poverty and provides more support for women in general and pregnant women in particular. For that matter, my vote should encourage sex education and freely available contraception if I want there to be fewer unwanted pregnancies. I find there is a compulsion toward embracing in-group and out-group bias in conservative politics, rather than mitigating against this involuntary human trait. This means they adopt an ideology that excuses their own tendencies toward selfishness. Lastly, I've come to learn that conservative economics aren't always better for the economy anyway, especially where my ambition in this regard is to see everyone prosper, not just a tiny wealthy band. I've adjusted my political economic view to one that places humans as the priority, allows for judicious use of funds to fairly help society across the board, and avoids wastefulness.